I got a message from your uncle, said Chapman, unfazed. He says you're to give these to your car. There must have been 30, maybe even 40 people in that hall, and now they were every one of them looking intently at their playing cards or their feet or their fingernails and pretending as hard as they could not to be listening. He's not my uncle. A cigarette smoke fog hung over the hall. Chapman smiled widely, displaying the worst set of teeth that Shadow had seen in a human mouth. You want to tell your uncle that? He says you're the only reason he stays among the Lakota. Whiskey Jack says a lot of things, said Harry Bluejay petulantly. But he did not say Whiskey Jack either. It sounded almost the same to Shadow's ear, but not quite. Was that Jack? He thought, that's what they're saying, not Whiskey Jack at all. Shadow said, yeah, and one of the things he said was that we're trading our Winnebago for your Buick. I don't see a Winnebago. He'll bring you the Winnebago, said John Chapman. You know he will. Harry Bluejay attempted a trick shot and missed. His hand was not steady enough. I'm not the old fox's nephew, said Harry Bluejay. I wish he wouldn't say that to people. Better a live fox than a dead wolf, said Wednesday in a voice so deep it was almost a growl. Now will you sell us your car? Harry Bluejay shivered visibly and violently. Sure, he said. Sure, I was only kidding. I kid a lot, me. He put down the pool cue on the pool table and took a thick jacket, pulling it out from a cluster of similar jackets hanging from pegs by the door. Let me get my shit out of the car first, he said. He kept darting glances at Wednesday as if he were concerned that the older man were about to explode. Harry Bluejay's car was parked 100 yards away. As they walked toward it, they passed a small whitewashed Catholic church and a man in a priest's collar who stared at them from the doorway as they went past. He was sucking on a cigarette as if he did not enjoy smoking it. Good day to you, Father, called Johnny Chapman, but the man in the collar made no reply. He crushed his cigarette under his heel, picked up the butt and dropped it into the bin beside the door and went inside. Harry Bluejay's car was missing its wing mirrors, and its tires were the baldest Shadow had ever seen. Perfectly smooth black rubber, Harry Bluejay told them the car drank oil. But as long as you kept pouring oil in, it would keep running forever unless it stopped. Harry Bluejay filled a black garbage bag with shit from the car, said shit including several screw-top bottles of cheap beer, unfinished, a small packet of cannabis resin wrapped in silver foil and badly hidden in the car's ashtray, a skunk tail, 24 country and western cassettes, and a battered, yellowing copy of Stranger in a Strange Land. Sorry, I was jerking your chain before, said Harry Bluejay to Wednesday, and passing him the car keys. You know when I'll get the Winnebago? Ask your uncle. He's the fucking used car dealer, growled Wednesday. Whiskey Jack is not my uncle, said Harry Bluejay. He took his black garbage bag and went into the nearest house and closed the door behind him. They dropped Johnny Chapman in Sioux Falls outside a Whole Foods store. Wednesday said nothing on the drive. He was in a black sulk as he had been since they left Whiskey Jack's place in a family restaurant just outside St. Paul. Shadow picked up a newspaper someone else had put down. He looked at it once, then again. Then he showed it to Wednesday. Look at that, said Shadow. Wednesday sighed and looked down at the paper. I am, he said, delighted that the air traffic controller's dispute has been resolved without recourse to industrial action. Not that, said Shadow. Look, it says it's the 14th of February. Happy Valentine's Day. So we set out January the 20th, 21st? I wasn't keeping track of the dates, but it was the third week of January. We were 3 days on the road, all told, so how is it the 14th of February? Because we walked for almost a month at Wednesday in the Badlands backstage. Hell of a shortcut, said Shadow. Wednesday pushed the paper away, fucking Johnny Appleseed, always going on about Paul Bunyan. In real life, Chapman owned 14 apple orchards. He farmed thousands of acres. Yes, he kept pace with the western frontier, but there's not a story out there about him with a word of truth in it. Save that he went a little crazy once, but it doesn't matter. Like the newspapers used to say, if the truth isn't big enough, you print the legend. This country needs its legends, and even the legends don't believe it anymore. But you see it. I'm a has-been. Who the fuck cares about me? Shadow said softly, you're a god. Wednesday looked at him sharply. He seemed to be about to say something, and then he slumped back in his seat and looked down at the menu and said, so? It's a good thing to be a god, said Shadow. Is it? Asked Wednesday. And this time it was Shadow who looked away. In a gas station 25 miles outside Lakeside, on the wall by the restroom, Shadow saw a homemade photocopied notice, a black and white photo of Allison McGovern, and the handwritten question, have you seen me, above it. Same yearbook photograph, smiling confidently, a girl with rubber band braces on her top teeth who wants to work with animals when she grows up. Have you seen me? Shadow bought a Snickers bar, a bottle of water, and a copy of the Lakeside News. The above the fold story, written by Marguerite Olson, our Lakeside reporter, showed a photograph of a boy and an older man out on the frozen lake, standing by an outhouse-like ice fishing shack, and between them they were holding a big fish. They were smiling. Father and son catch local record northern pike. Full story inside. Wednesday was driving. He said, read me anything interesting you find in the paper. Shadow looked carefully, and he turned the pages slowly, but he couldn't find anything. Wednesday dropped him off in the driveway outside his apartment. A smoke-colored cat stared at him from the driveway, then fled when he bent to stroke it. Shadow stopped on the wooden deck outside his apartment and looked out at the lake. Dotted here and there with green and brown ice fishing huts, many of them had cars parked beside them. On the ice nearer the bridge sat the old green clunker, just as it had sat in the newspaper. March 23rd, said Shadow encouragingly. Round 9:15 in the morning. You can do it. Not a chance, said a woman's voice. April 3rd, 6 p.m. That way, the day warms up the ice. Shadow smiled. Marguerite Olson was wearing a ski suit. She was at the far end of the deck, refilling the bird feeder. I read your article in the Lakeside News on the town record Northern Pike. Exciting, huh? Well, educational, maybe. I thought you weren't coming back to us, she said. You were gone for a while, huh? My uncle needed me, said Shadow. The time kind of got away from us. She placed the last suet brick in its cage and began to fill a net sock with the thistle seeds from a plastic milk jug. Several goldfinches, olive in their winter coats, twitted impatiently from a nearby fir tree. I don't see anything in the paper about Allison McGovern. There wasn't anything to report. She's still missing. There was a rumor that someone had seen her in Detroit, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Poor kid. Marguerite Olson screwed the top back onto the gallon jug. I hope she's dead, she said matter-of-factly. Shadow was shocked. Why? Because the alternatives are worse. The goldfinches hopped frantically from branch to branch of the fir tree, impatient for the people to be gone. You aren't thinking about Allison, thought Shadow. You're thinking of your son. You're thinking of Sandy. He remembered someone saying, I miss Sandy. Who was that? Good talking to you, he said. Yeah, she said, you too. February passed in a succession of short, gray days. Some days the snow fell, most days it didn't. The weather warmed up, and on the good days it got above freezing. Shadow stayed in this apartment until it began to feel like a prison cell. And then on the days that Wednesday did not need him to travel, he began to walk. He would walk for much of the day, long trudges out of the town. He walked alone until he reached the national forest to the north and the west, or the cornfields and cow pastures to the south. He walked the Lumber County Wilderness Trail, and he walked along the old railroad tracks, and he walked the back roads a couple of times, even walked along the frozen lake from north to south. Sometimes he'd see locals or winter tourists or joggers, and he'd wave and say hi. Mostly he saw nobody at all. Just crows and finches, and a few times he spotted a hawk feasting on a roadkill possum or raccoon. On one memorable occasion, he watched an eagle snatch a silver fish from the middle of the White Pine River, the water frozen on the edges, but still rushing and flowing at the center. The fish wriggled and jerked in the eagle's talons, glittering in the midday sun. Shadow imagined the fish freeing itself and swimming off across the sky, and he smiled grimly. If he walked, he discovered he did not have to think, and that was just the way he liked it. When he thought, his mind went to places he could not control, places that made him feel uncomfortable. Exhaustion was the best thing. When he was exhausted, his thoughts did not wander to Laura or to the strange dreams or to things that were not and could not be. He would return home from walking and sleep without difficulty and without dreaming. He ran into Police Chief Chad Mulligan in George's barber shop in the town square. Shadow always had high hopes for haircuts, but they never lived up to his expectations. And every haircut he looked more or less the same, only with shorter hair. Chad, seated in the barber's chair beside Shadow's, seemed surprisingly concerned about his own appearance. When his haircut was finished, he gazed grimly at his reflection, as if he were preparing to give it a speeding ticket. "It looks good," Shadow told him. "Would it look good to you if you were a woman? I guess." They went across the square to Mabel's together, ordered mugs of hot chocolate. Chad said, "Hey, Mike, have you ever thought about a career in law enforcement?" Shadow shrugged. "I can't say I have," he said. "Secrets like there's a whole lot of things you got to know." Chad shook his head. "You know, the main part of police work, somewhere like this, it's just keeping your head. Something happens. Somebody's screaming at you, screaming blue murder. You simply have to be able to say that you're sure that it's all a mistake, and you'll just sort it out if they just step outside quietly, and you have to be able to mean it. And then you sort it out. Mostly that's when you put handcuffs on them. But yeah, you do what you can to sort it out. Let me know if you want a job. We're hiring, and you're the kind of guy we want. I'll keep that in mind if the thing with my uncle falls through." They sipped their hot chocolate. Mulligan said, "Say, Mike, what would you do if you had a cousin, like a widow, and she started calling you?" "Calling you how?" "On the phone. Long distance. She lives out of state." His cheeks crimsoned. "I saw her last year at a family wedding. She was married back then, though. I mean, her husband was still alive, and she's family. Not a first cousin, pretty distant." "You got a thing for her?" Blush. "I don't know about that." "Well, then put it another way. Does she have a thing for you?" "Well, she's said a few things when she called. She's a very fine-looking woman." "So, what are you going to do about it?" "I could ask her out here. I could do that, couldn't I? She's kind of said she'd like to come up here." "You're both adults. I'd say go for it." Chad nodded and blushed and nodded again. The telephone in Shadow's apartment was silent and dead. He thought about getting it connected, but could think of no one he wanted to call. Late one night, he picked it up and listened, and was convinced that he could hear a wind blowing and a distant conversation between a group of people talking in voices too low to properly make out. He said, "Hello? And who's there?" But there was no reply, only a sudden silence, and then the faraway sound of laughter, so faint he was not certain he was not imagining it. Shadow made more journeys with Wednesday in the weeks that followed. He waited in the kitchen of a Rhode Island cottage and listened while Wednesday sat in a darkened bedroom and argued with a woman who would not get out of bed, nor would she let Wednesday or Shadow look at her face. In the refrigerator was a plastic bag filled with crickets and another filled with the corpses of baby mice. In a rock club in Seattle, Shadow watched Wednesday shout his greeting over the noise of the band to a young woman with short red hair and blue spiral tattoos. That talk must have gone well, for Wednesday came away from it grinning delightedly. 5 days later, Shadow was waiting in the rental when Wednesday walked, scowling, from the lobby of an office building in Dallas. Wednesday slammed the car door when he got in and sat there in silence, his face red with rage. He said, "Drive." Then he said, "Fucking Albanians, like anybody cares." 3 days after that, they flew to Boulder, where they had a pleasant lunch with 5 young Japanese women. It was a meal of pleasantries and politeness, and Shadow walked away from it, unsure of whether anything had been agreed or decided. Wednesday, though, seemed happy enough. Shadow had begun to look forward to returning to Lakeside. There was a peace there and a welcome that he appreciated. Each morning, when he was not traveling, he would drive across the bridge to Town Square. He would buy 2 pasties at Mabel's. He would eat 1 pasty then and there and drink a coffee. If someone had left a newspaper out, he would read it, although he was never interested enough in the news to purchase a newspaper himself. He would pocket the second pasty, wrapped it in its paper bag, and eat it for his lunch. He was reading USA Today one morning when Mabel said, "Hey, Mike, where are you going today?" The sky was pale blue. The morning mist had left the trees covered with hoarfrost. "I don't know," said Shadow. "Maybe I'll walk the wilderness trail again." She refilled his coffee. "You ever gone east on County Q? It's kind of pretty out that way." "That's the little road that starts across from the carpet store on 20th Avenue. "No, never have." "Well," she said, "it's kind of pretty." It was extremely pretty. Shadow parked his car at the edge of town and walked along the side of the road, a windig county road that curled around the hills to the east of the town. Each of the hills was covered with leafless maple trees, bone-white birches, dark firs, and pines. At one point, a small dark cat kept pace with him beside the road. It was the old color of dirt, with white forepaws. He walked over to it. It did not run away. "Hey, cat," said Shadow unself-consciously. The cat put its head on one side, looked up at him with emerald eyes, then it hissed. Not at him, but at something over on the side of the road, something he could not see. "Easy," said Shadow. The cat stalked away across the road and vanished into a field of old unharvested corn. Around the next bend in the road, Shadow came upon a tiny graveyard. The headstones were weathered, although several of them had sprays of fresh flowers resting against them. There was no wall about the graveyard and no fence, only low mulberry trees planted at the margins, bent over with ice and age. Shadow stepped over the piled-up ice and slush at the side of the road. There were 2 stone gate posts marking the entry to the graveyard, although there was no gate between them. He walked into the graveyard between the 2 posts. He wandered around the graveyard looking at the headstones. There were no inscriptions later than 1969. He brushed the snow from a solid-looking granite angel and he leaned against it. He took the paper bag from his pocket and removed the pasty from it. He broke off the top. He breathed a faint wisp of steam into the wintry air. It smelled really good, too. He bit into it. Something rustled behind him. He thought for a moment it was the cat, but then he smelled perfume, and under the perfume, the scent of something rotten. "Please don't look at me," she said from behind. "Hello, Laura," said Shadow. Her voice was hesitant, perhaps, he thought, even a little scared. She said, "Hello, puppy." He broke off some pasty. "Would you like some?" he asked. She was standing immediately behind him. No, she said. "You eat it. I don't eat food anymore." He ate his pasty. It was good. "I want to look at you," he said. "You won't like it," she told him. "Please." She stepped around the stone angel. Shadow looked at her in the daylight. Some things were different and some things were the same. Her eyes had not changed, nor had the crooked hopefulness of her smile, and she was, very obviously, very dead. Shadow finished his pasty. He stood up and tipped the crumbs out of the paper bag, then folded it up and put it back into his pocket. The time he had spent in the funeral home in Cairo made it easier somehow for him to be in her presence. He did not know what to say to her. Her cold hand sought his, and he squeezed it gently. He could feel his heart beating in his chest. He was scared, and what scared him was the normality of the moment. He felt so comfortable with her at his side that he would have been willing to stand there forever. "I miss you," he admitted. "I'm here," she said. "That's when I miss you most, when you're here. When you aren't here, when you're just a ghost from the past or a dream from another life, it's easier then." She squeezed his fingers. "So," he asked, "what's death? How's death?" "Hard," she said. "It just keeps going." She rested her head on his shoulder, and it almost undid him. He said, "You want to walk for a bit?" "Sure." She smiled up at him, a nervous, crooked smile in a dead face. They walked out of the little graveyard and made their way back down the road toward the town, hand in hand. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Here," he said, "mostly." "Since Christmas," she said. I kind of lost you. Sometimes I would know where you were for a few hours, for a few days. You'd be all over. Then you'd fade away again." "I was in this town," he said. "Lakeside. It's a good little town." "Oh," she said. She no longer wore the blue suit in which she had been buried. Now she wore several sweaters and a long dark skirt and high burgundy boots. Shadow commented on them. Laura ducked her head and she smiled. "Aren't they great boots? I found them in this great shoe store in Chicago." "So what made you decide to come up from Chicago?" "Oh, I've not been in Chicago for a while, puppy. I was heading south. The cold was bothering me. You'd think I'd welcome it. But it's something to do with being dead, I guess. You don't feel it as cold. You feel it as a sort of nothing. And when you're dead, I guess the only thing that you're scared of is nothing. I was going to go to Texas. I planned to spend the winter in Galveston. I think I used to winter in Galveston when I was a kid." "I don't think you did," said Shadow. "You've never mentioned it before?" "No? Maybe it was someone else then. I don't know. I remember seagulls throwing bread in the air for seagulls, hundreds of them, the whole sky becoming nothing but seagulls as they flapped their wings and snatched the bread from the air." She paused. "If I don't see it, I guess someone else did." A car came around the corner. The driver waved them hello. Shadow waved back. It felt wonderfully normal to walk with his wife. "This feels good," said Laura as if she was reading his mind. "Yes," said Shadow. "When the call came, I had to hurry back. I was barely into Texas." "Call?" She looked up at him. Around her neck, the gold coin glinted. It felt like a call. She stared. She said, "I started to think about you, about how much I needed to see you. It was like a hunger." "Yes, you knew I was here then." "Yes." She stopped. She frowned, and her upper teeth pressed into her blue lower lip. Biting it gently, she put her head on one side and said, "I did. Suddenly I did. I thought you were calling me, but it wasn't you, was it?" "No. You didn't want to see me." "It wasn't that," he hesitated. "No. I didn't want to see you. It hurts too much." The snow crunched beneath their feet, and it glittered diamonds as the sunlight caught it. "It must be hard," said Laura, "not being alive." "You mean it's hard for you to be dead? Look, I'm still going to figure out how to bring you back properly. I think I'm on the right track." "No," she said. "I mean, I'm grateful, and I hope you really can do it. I did a lot of bad stuff." She shook her head, "but I was talking about you." "I'm alive," said Shadow. "I'm not dead, remember?" "You're not dead," she said, "but I'm not sure that you're alive either, not really." This isn't the way this conversation goes, thought Shadow. This isn't the way anything goes. I love you, she said dispassionately. You're my puppy. But when you're really dead, you get to see things clearer. It's like there isn't anyone there, you know? You're like this big, solid, man-shaped hole in the world. She frowned. Even when we were together, I loved being with you. You adored me, and you would do anything for me. But sometimes I'd go in a room, and I wouldn't think there was anybody in there. And I'd turn the light on, or I'd turn the light off, and I'd realize that you were in there, sitting on your own, not reading, not watching TV, not doing anything. She hugged him then. as if to take the sting from her words, and she said, "Best thing about Robbie was that he was somebody. He was a jerk sometimes, and he could be a joke, and he loved to have mirrors around when we made love so he could watch himself fucking me, but he was a live puppy. He wanted things. He filled the space." She stopped, looked up at him, tipped her head a little to one side. "I'm sorry. Did I hurt your feelings?" He did not trust his voice not to betray him, so he simply shook his head. "Good." She said, "That's good." They were approaching the rest area where he had parked his car. Shadow felt that he needed to say something. "I love you," or "Please don't go," or "I'm sorry." The kind of words used to patch a conversation that had lurched without warning into the dark places. Instead he said, "I'm not dead." "Maybe not," she said. "But are you sure you're alive?" "Look at me," he said. "That's not an answer," said his dead wife. "You'll know it when you are." "What now?" he said. "Well," she said, I've seen you now. I'm going south again." "Back to Texas?" "Somewhere warm. I don't care." "I have to wait here," said Shadow, "until my boss needs me." "That's not living," said Laura. She sighed. And then she smiled, the same smile that had been able to tug at his heart no matter how many times he saw it. Every time she smiled at him had been the first time all over again. He went to put his arm around her, but she shook her head and pulled out his reach. She sat down on the edge of a snow-covered picnic table and she watched him drive away. The war had begun, and nobody saw it. The storm was lowering, and nobody knew it. A falling girder in Manhattan closed a street for 2 days. It killed 2 pedestrians, an Arab taxi driver and the taxi driver's passenger. A trucker in Denver was found dead in his home. The murder instrument, a rubber-gripped, claw-headed hammer, had been left on the floor beside his corpse. His face was untouched, but the back of his head was completely destroyed, and several words in a foreign alphabet were written on the bathroom mirror in brown lipstick. In a postal sorting station in Phoenix, Arizona, a man went crazy, went postal, as they said on the evening news, and shot Terry the Troll Evanson, a morbidly obese, awkward man who lived alone in a trailer. Several other people in the sorting station were fired on, but only Evanson was killed. The man who fired the shots, first thought to be a disgruntled postal worker, was not caught and was never identified. "Frankly," said Terry the Troll Evanson, supervisor, on the news at 5. "If anyone around here was going to go postal, we would have figured it was going to be the Troll. Okay, worker, but a weird guy. I mean, you never can tell, huh?" That interview was cut when the segment was repeated later that evening. A community of 9 anchorites in Montana was found dead. Reporters speculated that it was a mass suicide, but soon the cause of death was reported as carbon monoxide poisoning from an elderly furnace. A crypt was defiled in the Key West graveyard. An Amtrak passenger train hit a UPS truck in Idaho, killing the driver of the truck. None of the passengers was seriously injured. It was still a Cold War at this stage, a phony war, nothing that could be truly won or lost. The wind stirred the branches of the tree. Sparks flew from the fire. The storm was coming. The Queen of Sheba, half demon, they said, on her father's side, witch woman, wise woman, and queen, who ruled Sheba when Sheba was the richest land there ever was, when its spices and its gems-scented woods were taken by boat and camelback to the corners of the earth, who was worshipped, even when she was alive, worshipped as a living goddess by the wisest of kings, stands on the sidewalk of Sunset Boulevard at 2:00 a.m., staring blankly out at the traffic like a slutty plastic bride on a black and neon wedding cake. She stands as if she owns the sidewalk and the night that surrounds her. When someone looks straight at her, her lips move, as if she is talking to herself. When men and cars drive past her, she makes eye contact and she smiles. It's been a long night. It's been a long week and a long 4,000 years. She is proud that she owes nothing to anyone. The other girls on the street, they have pimps, they have habits, they have children, they have people who take what they make. Not her. There's nothing holy left in her profession, not anymore. A week ago, the rains began in Los Angeles, slicking the streets into road accidents, crumbling the mud from the hillsides and toppling houses into canyons, washing the world into the gutters and storm drains, drowning the bums and the homeless camped down in the concrete channel of the river. When the rains come in Los Angeles, they always take people by surprise. Bill Quiz has spent the last week inside, unable to stand on the sidewalk. She is curled up in her bed in the room the color of raw liver, listening to the rain pattering on the metal box of the window air conditioner and placing personals on the internet. She has left her invitations on adultfriendfinder.com, laescorts.com, classyhollywoodbabes.com, has given herself an anonymous email address. She was proud of herself for negotiating the new territories, but remains nervous. She has spent a long time avoiding anything that might resemble a paper trail. She has never even taken a small ad in the back pages of the LA Weekly, preferring to pick out her own customers, to find by eye and smell and touch the ones who will worship her as she needs to be worshipped, the ones who will let her take them all the way. And it occurs to her now, standing and shivering on the street corner, for the late February rains have left off, but the chill they brought with them remains, that she has a habit as bad as that of the smack-whores and the crack-whores, and this distresses her, and her lips begin to move again. If you were close enough to her ruby red lips, you would hear her say, "I will rise now and go about the city in the streets and in the broad ways. I will seek the one I love." She is whispering that, and she whispers, "By night and on my bed I sought him whom my soul loveth. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. My beloved is mine, and I am his." Bilquist hopes that the break in the rains will bring the Johns back. Most of the year she walks the same 2 or 3 blocks on Sunset, enjoying the cool LA nights